In the month of March, it is the birthday month of the Prime Vanguard channel. With 3 years of being active on and off, I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's been supporting the channel and watching me grow. I appreciate all of your comments, thoughts, and feelings that I get from Instagram, that I get from Facebook, and that I get on this channel alone. We've gone from deck profiles to reactions to discussions, and overall as a card fighter, I have grown a lot thanks to this channel and talking to you guys. For this very special birthday, I want to say thank you again to everybody. And I figured why not do a deck profile on the deck that started it all. So in today's video and the birthday video of the Prime Vanguard channel, I will be doing a full-on comprehensive deck profile for my Knights of Fury Agravain in the current V Premium meta. Agravain has been a deck profile that I have done many times on this channel. I believe I have 3 to 4 deck profiles on it. You can definitely check them out in the history of the channel, but it's safe to say that Agravain is a deck that I'm very familiar with and I enjoy a lot. While this deck has had its fall from grace due to the whole Percival ban, it still is a very fun and powerful deck. You have a lot of aggression going for you on your first grade 3 turn, and with the introduction of all the new Gold Paladin support since the ban of Percival and V-Clan Collection, it has become a lot more fun to play in later dates. Despite the current meta of V Premium with Steam Maidens, Thavis, and other decks that are out right now, the way that I play Agravain, just as much as I know about the matchups for it in these particular games, I actually have a lot of fun with this deck still. You can go for different routes with it with the 12 card Soul Blast, or you can go for the early game aggro route and bouncing your cards back to hand via Agravain and Edmund to push later for your Agravain turn. The deck definitely has a lot of different styles of play, and there's a lot of cards and versatility you can add to it through deck building, but we'll discuss that later on in this video. Heading over to camera 2, we will now get started with our Agravain deck profile. Knight of Fury Agravain in this current metagame of Vanguard actually has a lot of solid things going for it. With the addition of all the new Gold Paladin support, your first and second ability are at the most consistent they've ever been. Agravain's first skill to generate a bunch of cards into the soul by being called out from the rear guards and giving us new cards from the top of the deck is still very strong at helping us generate potentially 7 to 8 attacks. While we don't generate extra excel markers or give power like the new Gold Paladin cards, we can still use all of our resources and the effects of our other cards to play a very fast game or a very slow game, depending on which win condition we want to go for. If we just want to go for a very fast rush attack and rely on our rear guards to do the beatdown, we can use our first ability and early game rush cards to do that. If we want to play a slower game, depending on the matchup, we can set up for the Act 12 ability, which will deny all the card advantage that our opponents got in the later game for the newer cards. Another great thing about Agravain is that this card has always been cheap. For 1 CB, you can do a lot. And since we're only using 1 counterblast and we play 1 form of countercharge in the deck, we were able to allocate all of our other counterblasts to our rear guards and need power-up skills, which means we can use those to make magic numbers against our opponent, depending on the matchup or depending on if they are defensive. This way, unlike prior, defensives don't interrupt us, and with the addition of all the new cards that now have extra power or shield, while they maintain a Vanguard with a certain name, we're still able to keep up with these decks that can generate these insane columns or numbers. And since all of the rear guards in the deck at this point have some form of superior calling or drawing or some other effect to benefit to your hand or just resources you have on the board, triggering the effects of all of your cards, getting those additional superior calls during the battle phase or getting that extra attack or resource check you might need like a soul charge or counter charge is not hard to do so at all. Hopefully with one more wave of support or bringing Percival back to 1, Agravain can make its way back to the top in the future. For my next grade 3, I am playing 3 copies of Full Cavalier Dragon. Full Cavalier Dragon is still a staple to the Agravain strategy. For a Soul Blast of 1, which is an easy resource we generate, we get a free superior call which adds to Agravain's count, as well as applying our Vanguard 5000 power. Full Cavalier Dragon has still proven itself to be a staple within the Agravain deck. This card generates you a free superior call and then applies power to your Vanguard, making Agravain's attack matter in the grand scheme of things. With the additional power from Full Cavalier Dragon, this means that all of the attacks you have that turn will matter, as since the deck can generate up to 7 to 8 attacks, you will have 7 to 8 attacks that your opponent will have to deal with. And if they're at 4 damage, that puts a lot of pressure, which is why this deck has been performing very well when you rush in the early game. I have been playing Cavalier Dragon with Knight of Fury Agravain for the last 2 years now. This card has still standed the test of time and proven itself to be a very valuable ally to maximizing the number of attacks and calls we get with Agravain, unlocking our Vanguard's full power. For my next grade 3, I am playing 3 copies of Knights of Flying Rings Edmund. This is a card that in previous deck profiles I have favored a lot, and to this day I still do. Edmund being able to return to your hand and become a 10,000 point shield while also adding to the number of calls you make, as well as boosting a rearguard into soul and not making it go to waste, is extremely helpful to your Agravain defense strategy, as we use a lot of cards from our hand to bring new cards out to the field, and while that has reduced due to the effects of new cards for Gold Paladin, Edmund being a card that recycles itself from the board back into the hand and then potentially being a shield or another call while gaining power offensively and defensively is still extremely amazing and a really powerful Gold Paladin utility card. Since Agravain doesn't apply any power to any of our rear guards and we're relying on the effects of our own cards, triggers, and Excel markers to do so, Edmund is one of the very few cards in the deck that can push itself to a high enough ceiling to where it becomes a magic number against other decks. Which means that if we don't have the best call options for Agravain, we can at least call Edmund and something else to give it enough power to make one of the attacks matter and still set up for soul plays later. As when you call this card an Agravain on the second call with Agravain's ability, those are the cards that actually start pushing the cards into the soul in the later game to help set up for that act ability if need be. Therefore, it is a valuable asset to the Agravain deck and main strategy. For my next grade 3, and a new addition to this deck entirely, I am playing 2 copies of Mox/Dragon. Now, Mox/Dragon is a card that I've been testing out for a while now, and Mox/Dragon is a card that I've known about for a while now, and while I have seen it in Gurgawit decks and have tried it out in my Gurgawit deck, I decided to make its transition to the Agravain deck. Our Vanguard Agravain only uses 1 counterblast, which means that if we ever get rushed hard or take a lot of damage early, we have a lot of open CB in the past that we didn't use anything for it. While I do have cards that gain power when you counterblast for them to make them hit that magic number ceiling, I wanted to try something different, and Mox/Dragon was a good change. This card generates extra attacks during your battle phase, which is great because this is how we generate our 7-8 attack turns, and since all of our rear guards either call more cards or they give themselves power while calling cards, we can generate an entirely new column that, depending on where the matchup is at, can be a great asset to help finishing out games. This card powers itself up by 5,000 as well, making it a magic number against other Excel and Protect decks, which means that we are now pushing really hard with these smaller attacks, and our big ones and our Agravain ceiling is getting higher and higher and higher, as this generates an extra call during any period of the game, whether we're on Agravain prior to the first ability or on Agravain after the second effect and triggers have been applied. It's just a great card helping to push those extra attacks and set up for those extra calls to make Agravain work at its full power. Moving on to my grade 2s, I am still playing 4 copies of Liberator of the Flute Escrad. Liberator of the Flute Escrad has still proven itself to be one of the best supporting Agravain cards. This card for free generates you an extra body on the board, which counts toward Agravain's calls, and it does it at any period in the game, which I'll explain later, and it gives itself 5,000 power when you need it. This is one of the cards that ties very well with Mox/Dragon, because this is how you generate an extra power column or an extra attack. Because Mox/ will call this card out, you'll get another body on board, and depending on what your formation looks like at times, you will use this to generate another 3 attacks, or you will use this to make 1 very strong column with your Escrad, or you put in the Excel marker. Either way, this is just a free card to help setting up those early game rush plays, or to start using as fodder for your 12 card Soul Blast with Agravain. It's also a great early game rush card when you ride into it as Vanguard, and because we do have grade 2 options that move themselves from the field to the hand, or at least assist us with our resource management or generate extra attacks, this card becomes really fun to play in the early game if you have proper setup. For my next grade 2, I am playing 3 copies of Oath Liberator Agravain. While we don't have Percival, Agravain itself is a very powerful card. It serves as a very strong Vanguard that helps you set up and call out certain pieces compared to the random top deck calling of our other cards, and it's an extremely powerful rearguard that shares the same skill as Edmund. This is one of the cards we use in our early game rush strategies, as if we go into a Scrad, we call this card out and another rearguard, and we just start swinging in the early game, and then we can move our rearguard into soul early to start building up the soul for Agravain for our Act 12 ability, and then add this back to our hand to get another 5k shield back. Along with Edmund, these 2 cards make 15,000 shield, which is essentially a trigger, and yes, it is 2 cards, but it's still shield value you're getting back to your hand, as we do use a lot of cards from our hand to generate the board needed to get our Agravain skill up to max capacity. This card has proven itself as a staple in other Gold Paladin decks. The additional 10,000 power, bouncing back to hand, and being a strong Vanguard substitute compared to what you run or ride instead is just overall amazing, and this card is honestly a solid 10 out of 10. Moving on to our next grade 2, and a new addition to the deck is 2 copies of Knights of Treasured Bow Vitriness. The Vitriness was a card that I discovered by accident, and it was a very happy accident as I didn't know this card existed. It is a promo card that I found about later, and while we have another new promo card for Gold Paladin at the time making this video, I'm still trying this one out. Vitriness solves one of the biggest issues I've had in this deck in the past, which is being in that awkward situation where you have a lot of grade 2s or 3s and not being able to get boosters on the board to make those columns count. He fixes that issue. And for another new addition to the deck, I'm playing 2 copies of Flame Wind Lion Wonder Ezel. Now, Flame Wind Lion Wonder Ezel is just part of the Mox/Dragon combo. This essentially is how you generate, again, those 8 attacks, and it works out very well at any period in the game with our Agravain or Mox/Dragon. As I stated earlier with cards like Scrad, Vitriness, Agravain, this is just another body on board that gives you another body on board, and this counts as an effect. So this is how your Gorbaducks and your Vitrinesses that I just showcased get those additional power via their abilities. It also counts towards Agravain's Call, as any Spirit Call we make, or just Call in general, counts towards that. And if we use it during the second wave of attacks with our Agravain's ability, and our formation is looking a little weak because we got a lot of triggers and to get enough bodies from the deck, we can use this card to put another body from our hand onto the board and correct any formation problems we may have. It really is a great offensive extender piece for the deck. It's an amazing extender piece for the deck, and this is just how it's an amazing extender piece for the deck, and naturally works through Mox/Dragon or Agravain to make sure that all of the attacks you have matter, as you don't want too many low powered attacks in later game when you're trying to close the game. Next up, I play 4 copies of Dawning Knight Gorbaduck. Gorbaduck is your generic grade 3 searcher for Gold Paladin. We play a variety of grade 3s in the deck that we want to see at different periods of the game, whether we need Agravain to ride, Cavalier to set up, Edmund for some early offense, or if we need Mox/Dragon and we want it in our hands so we don't have to worry about not seeing it from the deck, we can set up all of those pieces to generate these extra calls that we need, or to make sure that our formation is correct when it's time. For my next grade 1 and making a return into the deck, I am playing 3 copies of Knight of Sound Health Kunadagus. Knight of Sound Health Kunadagus is the card that came out in the same set as Agravain. It has the ability to apply power based on the number of calls that you make. If you make 2 or more, you get 3,000 power to that particular unit. If you get 4 or more, that unit gets an additional 5,000 power on top of that. This is the card that's supposed to give Agravain power during the battle phase, because Agravain, as you know, does not gain power by any means necessary, so cards like Cavalier and Kunadagus make sure that this card can hit and its attack will matter during the battle phase. But if we're not using it to boost Agravain, this card becomes a very powerful booster for your rear guards. It becomes, with 8,000 reaching the maximum call of its ability, it essentially becomes a 16-point booster, which will turn any card you have into a magic number against your opponent, which is what this deck needs, as power has always been an issue with this deck. However, with cards like Kunadagus and the new support to Gold Paladin, that issue is no longer a problem. All of our cards generate power or have some sort of effect to gain power, so these cards just make it a lot easier to close out games, which deals with Agravain's biggest issue, which was not having a clear win condition. And for my last grade 1, I am playing 3 copies of Fast Chase Liberator Josephus. Arguably the best grade 1 Gold Paladin unit, this card is a very powerful starting Vanguard, as this is how we generate our early game rush. And if you throw this with a Scrad, it's a 2-card call that you can use to manipulate your deck with, or you can use to get extra bodies on the board to start rushing your opponent depending on the matchup. The second ability is really what I want it for, as since Soul is an extremely easy resource for this deck, and depending on the matchup we may or may not need the additional Soul for that 12-card Soul Blast, you can always know for a fact you'll be able to take advantage of both abilities that are on Josephus. Getting that extra draw and the extra counter charge is way better than choosing between Dindrain's power up in counter charge or getting her draw. Plus, it's an 8k body, so I don't have to worry about being on a 7k body anymore and getting rushed back as hard. We're always able to fully take advantage of this card without any issues, and that just makes it a really powerful resource generator. And now for my triggers. So I'm playing 4 copies of Knights of Forceful Fight Ninus, and then 2 copies of Greeting Drummer. Because Agravain does not generate any power, and one damage trigger, while it's not detrimental, will still hurt the deck a little bit when closing out games, these front triggers just balance out the power issues and make your rush turns just a lot stronger, especially on that second wave with Agravain, as at that point you'll be using effects to thin out your deck even more, so these front triggers become a lot scarier when playing against your opponent. I am playing 2 copies of Flame of Victory. With the way that V Premium is now and the way that Agravain works now, I do feel as though I want to try and start building the deck to add more crits to it eventually. I think that once we get the next wave of Gold Paladin support, I'll have a deck where all of my rear guards will have some sort of power up effect. And because I'm going to play cards that can boost that are grade 2s and grade 1s now, and I have that as an option, I think that we will reach a point where Agravain will become a more aggro critical based deck. For my next trigger, I am playing 4 copies of Halo Shield Mark. These are your generic Draw Sentinel PGs. You still need these, not much to say about it. And then finally, I have changed my heal trigger lineup with 2 copies of Clarity Winged Dragon and 2 copies of Elixir Sommelier. So I decided to change these up because the Clarity Winged Dragons, especially in very fast aggro decks that don't generate a lot of hand, is really good in the early game, and we have ways of searching it out. This deck goes very fast when it comes to generating cards and bodies on the field, so if we ever called Clarity Winged Dragon out and we already had a full board of attackers, it's no longer as good. That's why I went back to Elixir Sommelier, because while you wish to never call out a trigger, at least if I call this out, I know I can make an attacker or a booster, which just makes it a lot more valuable than playing a full set of these. I'm very happy with this change, but if you're scared of making it, you can just play 4 copies of this. And finally, for my starter, I'm playing 1 copy of Crimson Lion Cub Criff because Criff is the best starter. It just ironically fits the color palette and theme of this deck so much, I'm never taking this card out. Now that I've discussed the deck profile, I want to showcase cards that I'm no longer playing in the deck because I either A, think that they've just been outclassed, or B, I don't think that there's a spot for them right now in the deck based off the meta. Next up is 1 copy of Listener of the Truth Dindrain. I have nothing against Dindrain. I understand some Gold Paladin players still play this card with Josephus just to make sure that the resource management is always in the best condition as possible, because Gold Paladin doesn't have the strongest grade 1s at times that it feels like. However, because I play Josephus and power is no longer an issue with Agravain, in my personal opinion, this card isn't outclassed, but right now I just don't think it's good for the deck. I'm going to showcase these both at the same time, well, all 3, because they all do the same thing. These 3 cards aren't bad, they are just extenders for the 12 card Soul Blast with Agravain Turbo deck. You can play these, and I was playing this at like different ratios like 4, 4, and 2. That is fine if you want to play an Agravain Turbo deck. So because I'm not playing a Turbo deck, right now these cards are just not good because that's an entirely different build. Next up, we have Little Battler Tron. This used to be one of my favorite cards as it gave on-hit pressure to the deck, which was something I felt like the deck needed because generating power at low levels while having nothing to be scared of wasn't scary. But Tron got quickly outclassed because Josephus exists, and that's why this card is no longer there. Next up is Stronghold of the Black Chains Kaiden and Stronghold of the Black Chains Hoel. This little combo right here is very strong and always has been strong. It gives power, resource, and an extra call, which is great for setting up for Agravain, and you can use it in the early game. However, there are more consistent cards that do that now. However, there are cards now in the deck that do this better than these 2 cards now, and because of consistency reasons, I need space for other cards, and I just don't want to take out other cards to make space for these 2. These cards are not bad at all, just right now they're not good for Agravain in my personal opinion. Next up is 1 copy of Knight of Springlight Perrymore. Knight of Springlight Perrymore is an awkward card for me because this is one of those cards where it can always make a comeback into the deck. I will always make space for this card. It is a very good rear guard and Vanguard to have. It makes up for the card you call out from your hand and generates to another card called on the field, and it gains power the turn it's called out. So for all those particular reasons, Perrymore is one of those cards that if you want to play this card in the Agravain deck, or at least change it in my build, you can do that. The card that I would take out for Perrymore is like 1 copy of a Scrad, or just my playset of the Wonder Ezels in the deck to make space for this card. I'm only choosing not to play it right now because I like Wonder Ezel with Mox Slash Dragon, and for me personally, generating those extra attacks with Agravain and trying to win the game as fast as possible with that card is extremely important to me. Next up, I have 1 copy of Liberator of Royalty Fallon. Okay, so Fallon is another one of those awkward cards. If you do not like playing Liberator of the Flute as Scrad, You can play Fallon. The only reason why I'm not playing Fallon is for the same reason that I'm not playing Tron. This card is like a hybrid of a Scrad and Tron together, and while those cards are good, both of them are, I choose to play a Scrad over Fallon because a Scrad, the same reason for Ezel. It's just another free body on the board. There's no steps to take to get that extra body that's needed to make your Agravain count higher. If my opponent blocks this, that means that's one less body on the board and less deck manipulation that I have to break through. And the 5k power is nice, but I'm not gonna ruin my consistency for a small power buff. Next up, one copy of Knights of Hard Work Alienor. I thought this card was going to be an Agravain just a little bit longer, but it quickly got outclassed because, again, there are now better cards that, while they don't gain as much power as this card does, they do improve the consistency of Agravain just a lot more. Next up is one copy of Battlefield Storm Sagramore. Sagramore is an optional choice. If you don't like Wonder Ezel and you want to play more grade 3s to get that extra power, you can do that. That is perfectly fine. I just choose not to play Battlefield Storm Sagramore because unless you call Sagramore from your hand during the main phase, if you draw into it, or if you call Sagramore with your Mox/Dragon, the card itself becomes a 12k vanilla when called out by any other means necessary. So therefore, if I were to play this card, I would have to play at a low count to make sure that I see it via other card effects, or I have to have another card that can call out from hand. And Perrymore does not synergize with Sagramore because Perrymore only calls grade 2 or less cards, and I'm not playing Brenius in this build, and that just requires more setup. So therefore, Sagramore right now is just not good in Agravain at all. For the last two cards, it is Whitehair in the Moonshadows Pelennor. Pelennor is a great tech option for this deck. If you really want the extra Vanguard attack, you can go for it. I'm just choosing the value consistency to make Agravain work and the power up for my rear guards to work for my benefit as well over this card, because Pelennor, if you bring it out, it may or may not do anything, and it's really only good towards that late game push when you need it. Now, I do have this next card that I'm going to put on the screen, which is Platina Ezel. While I don't know where it's at, I will go ahead and explain why I'm not playing in the deck, but I do have the card in real life. I am no longer playing Platina Ezel in the deck because I personally feel, as I've been playing Agravain for so long, that I have learned the ins and outs of the deck, and I'm very confident that in most matchups that I play with it, I won't need the help of Platina Ezel to help finish out the games. While Platina Ezel is a very great finisher card for Agravain, and is a card that I most definitely would put like at least 2 copies of in the deck to make it work, I just don't feel like I need it right now. All of my rear guards do something to power themselves up. I have defensive rear guards that count for my calls and bring them back to hand. And Platina Ezel, while it is strong, it's really only beneficial to me in the later game if I have that proper setup. And while that's not hard to reach, it's just a failsafe card. Same thing with Pelennor. And right now, I just think that with the way that V Premium is and how fast V Premium is, I think that by the time I got this card onto Rye, I actually feel like my formation would get weaker as I am sacrificing more attacks just for the chances of potentially seeing a trigger. Agravain is without a doubt one of my favorite V Premium Vanguards, and I've had so much fun playing with it, from discussing the comprehensive deck list, the strategies, doing hand showcases, as well as talking about the cards that I no longer feel are good right now with Agravain. The deck has definitely been something that I have enjoyed playing with, and I've enjoyed seeing its growth on this channel as well. Now, with all of that being said, card fighters, I hope all of you have a great day, and again, thank you so much. I can't keep saying it enough. Thank you so much for continuing to watch the Prime Vanguard channel grow, and we're going to keep growing with more videos. Stay tuned for everything else coming out, card fighters. I'll catch you later. Peace.